call out. Here we go. AI with
Yeah.
Alec, round 2 with Will Croushorn, my man, AI leader at Wendy's, doing some amazing things. I'm just going to say it in the very beginning. If you don't follow this guy and you're in any way, shape, or form interested in AI, you're bananas. This guy's putting out some of the best content I've seen out there. Shout out Christian Ward. I know you agree with me because we engage with it and we get all sorts of cheat codes. So, Will, thank you for coming back. I'm going to give you an opportunity to big picture it, whatnot. You've already said a few things to me that I should have had the record button on. Just in the pre-call, I couldn't help, but kind of let it rip there.
Yeah.
But there are 2 posts that you have. One, Amazon, Disney, your favorite fast food brands. They're all racing towards one thing: context-aware retail. That plus the cousin of that, what happens when AI agents decide which products, brands, and ideas survive. Without further delay, Will, please introduce yourself. Tell everybody that this is not Wendy's point of view; it's your point of view. All that good stuff, and then let's go.
Yeah, let's go. Yeah, Will Croushorn. Man, Alec, that couldn't ask for a better introduction. I help oversee AI in the drive-through with Wendy's. Again, like you said, I speak for myself, not the brand. But what we're doing is really cool. I feel really privileged to be on the forefront of what, how do you take these AI platforms, these new technologies, how do you take them to enterprise at scale? Like we were talking about before we started recording, like this opportunity to, there's no playbook for this. And I think that every company, every organization, every employee, every person is trying to figure out, like, how do I operate in this new world that is changing? You look at, was it 2 years ago that ChatGPT was released to the world, and we're at lightning speed. And so being at the forefront of this, of going, all right, what does retail look like? If you look at shopping pre-internet, even just like pre-Facebook, pre-social media, completely different. And we're going in a similar direction, but at a much faster pace.
Without doubt. So I want to give you a ton of credit here because I did ask you before the call, and your content that you've been publishing is so informed. And I asked you, I was like you gotta let me know because I'm always looking for edge. Like where's the research? Where's it coming from? And I'm gonna let you explain a little bit more, but it builds on what you just said. But you're like, Alec, we're all figuring out as we go. You're an operator. You're in the trenches. You're experimenting. You're doing things. And it shows in a major way. And I want to give you, credit for that, but also tell folks a little bit about how have you adjusted your mindset, or what is the cultural dynamic at Wendy's that allows for this? Because that's where we all want to go. And some folks are able to do it, and others are struggling to get that. Maybe it's psychological permission, maybe it's high performance team culture, who knows? But I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I for me, and I think we talked about this on the last episode too, the thing that I'm really, like, I am personally just really curious, and I think that's a thing that is really necessary in this new world that we're entering into. But that hunger for, like, all right, what comes next? What does, when I'm shopping, how does this new experience, like, what does this unlock? How is this different? One of the things I'm really, really passionate about is, like, I'm a product guy. And as we're building these products, what does it look like to build a product that's not just throwing AI on, hey, it's become a new buzzword, but what does this actually mean in that it's creating value for the customer, for the end user? Like, why do I actually want to use this? And just looking at my own shopping experience, I'll give you a prime example. I'm looking for places to go on vacation this year. And so historically, over the past 10 or 15 years, I would go on Google, I'm searching, what are the top beach destinations? I'm going through Reddit threads. It takes a lot of work to actually filter through, those SEO targeted ads, like those things are popping up, and you're having to do the filtering. Literally last week, I'm going on ChatGPT, I'm going on Gemini, I'm saying, I'm watching White Lotus, I want to go to a place like that. I have been to Thailand. I love the island of Koh Lipe. I don't want to travel more than 7 hours outside of, I'm based in Nashville. And so I'm just brain dumping. Here's all of the things that I'm looking for. And it comes back and says, you should look at this, this, and this. And I go back and I say, all right, which resorts should I look at? And it's giving me two or three based on the entire context. That completely changes one, how quickly I'm looking at it, what places I'm going to go explore. And so just looking at that and going, all right, that's now. What does this look like 2, 3 years from now when I'm not having to give all of the context? The agent is connected and it just knows.
So let's do it right. Let's say the quote unquote quiet part out loud. Let's play this
Yeah.
out for folks that, some people hear what you're saying and say, "Oh, that's interesting," and maybe that'll happen in 5 years, or 2 years, or 3 years, or 1 year, or who knows.
Hmm.
So let's play this out. So there, and I'm looking at my notes here because I love the way you spoke about this notion of I think it was, instead of selecting, it was chosen, right? Is
Yep.
the mental model shift. So for the audience, what Will's describing is not science fiction. It's not out in the like realm of like, hey, 3 years from now, hypothetically, there is a real chance, let's just
Hmm.
be conservative, that we are all going to have AI agents that are going to enable us not to have to do so many more of the things that quote unquote we used to have to do in the world, that was like kind of 3 years ago. And
Hmm.
by doing that, you're stepping into an arena where everything changes because mediocre products, mediocre services, mediocre anything, we'll just leave it at that, is
Yep.
going to be bypassed by the agents who have a very, very high tuned understanding of what Will wants and is looking for. And unless it lines up, it's just not going to be something that the agent's going to put in front of you. So I wonder if you could just go into that a little bit further and make it real
Yeah.
for people, because this stuff is mind blowing when you really understand the
Dig into it.
implications of what could happen.
Yeah, it's super interesting because in some ways the things that are most human, those are the things get highlighted and everything else gets automated. And so, I mean, there's multiple examples, but I I'll take a restaurant for example. Like I think we're moving into a space, all of the big brands are moving, there's moving into robotics and AI agents and all of these things. And so I think if it can be automated, it probably will because you're going to see those efficiency gains, you're going to see the profitability margins. Like there's a lot of incentive there in a really tough economy that we're in now to automate. So I think if it can be automated, it probably will. What it can't replicate is like, that little local market down the street that grandma and grandpa own, and you go in and it's just that homemade cooked meal that is there's a sentiment there. There's a meal that is just special. You can't automate that.
Yeah.
That's what stands out. It's the restaurant that's in between where it's okay food. It's expensive because they haven't streamlined the automation, but it's still, kind of prepackaged. I don't see in the future, like, how does a restaurant like that compete with the streamlined efficiencies and the profit margins of something that's been automated or that really special, unique local spot? You can say the same thing about music. It's that local artist that just stands out, that's doing that thing that, they're unique, or I have a connection to them, or I relate to them in some way, or, it becomes more automated, mass produced. I can go on to like OpenAI has some really cool tools. Google has some really cool tools where I can go and start producing stuff right now. And so you see this split. It's everything in the middle that I think is at risk.
And therefore, right, is there's going to be likely remarkable experiences that are going to be invested and created that are going to be rewarded because the agents will likely on your behalf seek and find those types of experiences for you, where human creativity is going to be
Mm-hmm.
unleashed because it's going to be such an important part of differentiation because of what you kind of just described.
Yep. No, I completely agree. And I as I'm thinking as a product person, as we're creating these experiences in the drive-through, you these basic principles, like they've always existed. Like if you want to stand out, you have to make the most noise and you need to have the best product. That quality is super important. And I think that just becomes even more extreme in this day and age. Like if you want to have your service recommended by that agent, you have to be in the right place. You know, like I'm probably going to be recommended something in Nashville. Um, but it also has to be the thing that's quality. Like there has to be the user reviews, and there has to be, oh man, I would always go back there because of X, Y, and Z. And you really have to have that market fit of I know exactly who I'm trying to serve with this service or with this product. And if you're consistently providing the highest quality or the best experience or the most unique experience, you're more likely to be recommended by the agent, by that model, you know, because it's partnering you with the person that's looking for that exact thing. Again, you're in the middle, you have mediocre food or mediocre services or whatever, you're not going to stand out against that one or two top tier product.
Without a doubt. And big shout out to Seth Godin, who's the goat of all goats, right? The more things change, the more they stay the same. It's all about
Yep.
creating experience that you would tell your friends, right? And so if
Yep.
that's the experience, then you're in good shape. So switching gears, just going back a little bit to the contextually aware retail and context aware
Mm-hmm.
retail. I think, and again, I know, I'm a bit of a data infrastructure geek. There were some things you touched on in that piece, which again, big, shout out to you for really in a very tight way pointing to, okay, when you as a human go on to any, whether it be the Amazon experience or what have you, or any e-commerce environment, there's such precision at this
Mm-hmm.
point with which the way that those environments use data to feed into, if you're in a logged in environment or otherwise, what you've already, previously purchased and therefore you might want to purchase, or hey, if you're going to buy this, you might want to buy this, and so on and so forth. But then the physical retail environment, a little bit different, right?
Yep.
And I like the way you touched on some of the opportunities to join siloed data sets and some of the opportunities to look at that playbook and that experience and say, how do we start to make the physical world more familiar to the digital world and not to, so it feels so disjointed. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit about some of that stuff that you unpacked when it comes to the drivers of context aware retail that, in part are rooted in just data, right? And
Yeah.
amplify. Yeah, please.
So I think, this is something we're thinking a lot about. I spend a lot of time looking at, what are other companies doing?
Yeah.
Prime examples are, Amazon's Go. Like
Yeah.
they have to have a lot of context for you to be able to just walk in, grab the item, and just leave. But what does that unlock? Like that unlocks they're able to now understand like that customer looked at that shelf, they decided not to buy that product, or maybe they picked it up, they held it in their hand for 5 minutes, and then they put it back on the shelf. Those are things with like digital retail we've understood for a while and said, oh, they clicked here, this thing lived in their cart, and they had this abandon rate. But we've never had that sort of context in the retail world before. But we're moving in that way. And I think consumers are moving in a direction where we're starting to expect that. It's almost, I think about it like the Apple ecosystem. Like when I start on my iPhone and then I carry over to my MacBook, it just carries over. It's one continuous thing. And I see that rolling over. Tractor Supply is another example. Instacart. That understanding of like how is a customer moving through a store. Well, that should change maybe how we lay out the grocery store or where we put that product. And we talked about it in the pre-call, but I think it was Delta Airlines. They removed the olive
Yeah.
from their flights, and it's like
I don't
millions
like
of
olives, so
dollars.
that means
Yeah,
that's wonderful to me. No one needs olives. I like olive
exactly.
oil, but no one needs olives. Yeah.
Like this thing that costs like less than a penny, but at scale has a huge economic impact. And so when we're operating in these markets and economies that we are now, like those margins matter. And so I think this is a way for us to begin to understand it. With
Uh,
that said, uh, yeah,
please, no.
I think one thing that's on my radar is, how do we ensure like user privacy and there's an opt-in of security. And so I think there's like, and I don't have the answers for all of these. Like, I think these are really big questions that like society we have to deal with. Um, because we are moving more into that shopping as an ecosystem or experiences as an ecosystem. They're not these one-offs.
Yeah. So where I was going to go with that, which I think is a solid place to go, is the question for you. So here I'm going to speak from my own personal vantage point. I
Hmm.
am, as long as I know my data is secure, I am more than willing to provide access to that data and or enable a brand that I'm loyal to or that I'd like to be loyal to or I'm interested in being loyal to use that data to inform my experience to make it better. Right.
Hmm.
I love that idea. I absolutely love it. So how are you all thinking about, or maybe I should say in general, how do you think about, Will, that idea of the I don't know what you call it, but the consumer that's open to, like the consumer that fits the profile I just
Hmm.
described, which is me. How do you enable somebody, and what kinds of data would you ultimately get excited about, understanding to activate that more personalized, context aware retail experience?
Yeah, no, and I think you bring up a good point there. Like, as a user, I want the option to opt out. If I don't want to use this system, I shouldn't have to. And I think that's a really, really critical piece, that ability to opt in, opt out. If I choose to opt in, then, you know, like there's a reason I go with Apple. It's because, for better or for worse, I mostly trust how they handle my data. They've seemed to have been good stewards, and that might change in the future. We'll see. Um, but they've built that reputation, and so I think that trust is really important. But this goes back to like what we were talking about earlier. Like, I'm only going to opt in if it's worth it for me as an end user. If you're just slapping on like, "Hey, this is a gimmick," or it feels gimmicky, it doesn't really do anything different. Why would I do that? It's just easier. Again, path of least resistance. Um, there's no reason for me to opt in. But if you can give me an experience, I mean, Disney World is a really great example of this. Like, because I use that Magic Band, or because I log into the mobile app, I ride on a ride, and as soon as I get off the ride, they're sending me the picture straight to my phone. I don't have to log into anything.
Perfect.
Ecosystem.
Perfect. Right.
Yeah.
Where my mind goes, as somebody who grew up in the world of sport, is to your point about that. Like you think about, those that have season tickets, to a call it a hockey team, a football team, a basketball team, or whatever the favorite sport is,
Mhm.
or somewhat the equivalent in a concert environment that maybe, Madison Square Garden, New York City, has got all sorts of stuff going on. I'm always so curious about how, when, and where those data sets, are activated, are collected, are shared, and so on and so forth. Because I was actually taking an Uber to
Mhm.
a sport that I was actually playing in, and I was thinking of your post actually because I had read it I think a day before, because the ads I was getting in that Uber right in front of me, just the big screen in the seat, they weren't contextually aware.
Yeah.
They certainly weren't informed by all of my Uber related passenger data. I would have loved, in theory, because I was kind of bored while I'm sitting there. I would have loved to have been entertained. I would have loved to have maybe given them some insights into what kind of content I want to check out, and everybody wins. So I think you're tapping into this area that I think a lot of us are starting to really get excited about, which is maybe the advertising and marketing model is going to become a lot more, additive and personalized over time.
Yeah. It's something really interesting to me is like, so one, I think the marketing world becomes a lot more context aware,
Mm.
like we've been talking about. But then you also have added to that ability to, if you can generate 1,000 images for little to no cost, you're going to do that. And so yeah, I think that's probably where we see this going, is like, not only is it context aware, but it's completely personalized to you. I remember seeing just really early concepts of this. I think it was probably about 2 years ago, and I think it was a car company. They had made 1,000 different images, and they were targeted at. They were using those ads on, I think it was like Facebook or Instagram that they were targeting, but they had to manually make all 1,000 images. Literally within this year, it's already here, just maybe not at scale, but where you have that ability to on the fly generate that product image to show to you, Alec, in that Uber. That's completely game changer.
Without a doubt, because all I thought about, well, I was like, I'm going to play a sport, right? And then I'm going to need an Uber to go home after I play the sport. And the mindset that I have going to play the sport versus afterwards, right? there's going to be all sorts of different things that I might want to, consume afterwards because I just played a
Yeah.
sport. Or I might be thinking about, how to improve because I got beat. Or I'm feeling really good because I won or whatever. But
Yeah.
regardless, there's an opportunity to be like, hey, Coughlin, you want to improve your game? Why don't you stop by, Dick's Sporting Goods and pick up a couple of this, that, and the other thing? Because, you're probably thinking about that right now. And I would be like, that's a good call, Uber. I appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Well, and I think
Yeah.
this goes back to the quality thing. Like, what is the end goal in my opinion is I'm streamlining that decision making process. I'm helping meet your needs in a way that is easier and better for you. And so, to your example, if I can take the noise out and be like, "Hey, you're in Chicago for this baseball game. I know all of these things. Here's probably three things that you might want to do, or some restaurants you might want to go check out." That's eliminating the stress of. I mean, last time I was in Chicago and I'm trying to find food on the spot, like it's really stressful. And if something's there helping me through that decision making process, I'm much more likely to say yes, I'll do that. So, at the end of the day, it really is about serving customers really well, doing it in a way that is quality with their best interest. And I think if you can do that, there's a lot of opportunity for profit and growth.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's also interesting because I know the drive-through is something that we've talked to on several different occasions, and I find myself
Mm-hmm.
thinking about the drive-through experience, versus going in and sitting down and kind of all the math that goes through my head anytime I'm thinking that kind of stuff through. But I do think that there's something that's interesting, to just thinking out loud here, but when you're coming through a drive-through, it's not that dissimilar. I mean, sometimes you know exactly what you want. You're, in, out,
Mm-hmm.
boom, let's go. But it's not that different from, when you land in a certain environment where you have something in mind digitally and you're there. But I think one of the things that you talked about in your post was this notion of we're going to pretty soon, we're going to think about the way that people used to think about online versus offline as kind
Mm-hmm.
of archaic because it's all going to kind of more or
It
less
merges.
merge together, right?
Yeah. No, I definitely think that, I'm on my phone, the ad pops up, and then, what I'm doing in real life, like it carries over. Um, Tractor Supply is a great example of this. Like I know that they're testing out helping their crew members. If a customer is spending too long in a spot and they look confused, it'll ping
Hmm.
the crew member and it'll say, "Hey, here is a customer who might need some help." Or, maybe they're looking at a specific product, it's going to preemptively tell that crew member, um, hey, here's the product availability, here's some alternate products, or here's how long it would take to ship it to the store. Again, all of that in service of how do we help the customer? How do we remove the friction that currently exists? And if we can do that well at scale, that really helps our bottom line. Again, the core here is how do we use these technologies in ways that serve the customer, serve the end users to make it either a more unique experience, a more delightful experience, or remove friction? Literally for us, like one of the things that we're talking about is, I'm a big Disney parks nerd, and so like drive-throughs can be stressful because you're pulling up, there's people behind you, there's maybe you have kids screaming in the back seat, there's a million options on the screen, um, and I'm literally going and waiting in line at Disney World thinking like, how do you translate this experience where it's fun and exciting and I'm entertained, how do you translate this into ordering my food? Because if you can do that, like you're turning this just routine thing that you have to do into an experience that, oh man, I actually really enjoyed that. That was fun. I can't wait to go back. And I think this technology allows us to do that in a consistent way at scale that's never been possible before.
Without a doubt, one thing that I've picked up on in our conversations, and I've picked up on it with other folks that are really out front when it comes to leveraging AI in particular to enhance customer experiences, enhance and augment, the way that we all do our jobs and so on and so forth, is I keep hearing it. It's just you start with the customer, the consumer job to be done, right? The
Mm-hmm.
consumer need, the consumer want, and eventually you get to the technology. Is that more of like a framework that you guys deploy, as like this is how we quote unquote think through innovation, et cetera, when it comes to data tech innovation, et cetera? Or is it more so that's your culture of just you think and operate that way? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of both. I know, like my team, we have this phrase, oh, like "what if," and it's like, well, what if you could, what if you could pull up an order in any language, or what if you could pull up an order in sign language, or what if it didn't have to be that way? What if we only showed you two things, and you only had to choose between two things? Um, Again, that curiosity, that's what in my mind drives where the technology can go, because I think one of the things, especially in the technology world right now, is we have these really cool platforms. We have things like ChatGPT, we have Gemini, we have these. I mean, the sky's the limit. Literally every day, these new platforms are being rolled out. But what do you do with it? How do you actually use this in a way that is going to serve customers and make it profitable and support itself? And so I think you kind of have to be a little bit ahead of the game a little bit and say, well, what if we did this? Wait, what tools can help me get there to reduce this friction? Um, and I'm a big advocate for, like, if there's a cheaper way to do it. Like, I think right now we're in this age of, again, AI is the buzz term. But sometimes that might just mean, a lot of times it's just better data structures, more data points.
Totally.
There's ways to get from A to B that don't necessarily require LLMs. The question for me is, how do we get from A to B, and can we do it with these tools in a way that's never been done again, that serves the customer in a way that we couldn't do otherwise?
One more question on this because I'm curious, and by all means, if you're like, hey, I can't get into that, it's too specific. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the other side of this is the more modern your structure, whether it's technical architecture, data architecture, this, that, and the other thing, but the more often consumers like me, like Alec, who's
Mm-hmm.
more than willing to volunteer my data, if you can, give me something in exchange that's much more valuable than my perception of me volunteering my data to a consumer brand. Um, but there must be some really interesting insights that you then start to be able to develop because maybe you're collecting data that you hadn't necessarily you weren't able to see or you weren't able to process it at scale. Because one of the things that we've kind of alluded to and talked about previously is this notion of differentiating between the data that exists, the data that you could collect, the data
Mm-hmm.
that you have, right? What how much is enough? How much is too much? Where are the
Mm-hmm.
insights coming from, right? Like I think a lot of people today are starting to wake up to this idea of, oh my gosh, the data just keeps coming.
Yeah.
And how do we think about how do we make sense of what we have versus how do we maybe go get or enable um, gaps to be filled through the acquisition of data that doesn't currently exist in our environment. So how do you think about all that stuff?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, like, the two things that come to mind are, one, again, it's like asking the right questions. I mean, because especially for large companies, like a lot of, a company like Walmart or Amazon or, these or old school box stores, like they have a lot of data that they've been collecting over the years, but it hasn't done them a lot of good because they're looking at this high level surface of, like, oh, well, this is the check size, this is this is how many transactions we've had. Um, and so it's not necessarily, like, obviously the more data that you have, the more you can paint in the picture.
Mm.
But just because you have it doesn't mean that you're actually painting in that picture. You might have a smaller startup that might not have as much insights, but they're using it in a way that's, leveraging new technologies, or they're leveraging it to ask questions to paint in that picture to say, hey, what was that customer journey that, led it from the grocery store website to bring them online, or what did they actually do when they were navigating the grocery store, and how does that change what I build and what I put on the shelves? Um, so it's not necessarily how much, it's how you're using it that I think is really, really crucial. Um, yeah.
No, that's perfect, and I think that's there's a healthy tension there, right? How do we
Yeah.
make the most of the data that we have? But also, how do we start seeing around corners and realize, oh my gosh, if and when I could fill these gaps, I might be able to do the following. So, we're getting to time. So I'll give you the kind of the last question and just an
Mhm.
open-ended question. Anything else you want to share with the audience, Will? And I'm just going to remind the audience if they didn't see the front end, you got to follow this guy and the content he's putting out because he's helping all of us understand what's actually happening, in part on the leading edge of enterprise AI and consumer, experience. But anything else you want to leave the audience with and where they can find you and anything of that nature?
Yeah, definitely. Again, for me, it is be really curious, be really hungry, be asking what if, like, what do we do with these things? How do we serve customers? How do we build products? How do we, even professionally, like, how do you bring value to the business that you're working with in a way that maybe somebody else isn't? Again, it's that unique and automate. And so where do you fall in between that? And I think as long as we continue to move that, we continue to think through these really hard questions. I'm really excited about where I think all of this is going. Um, there's obviously big questions. There's big things that as a society we need to think through. Um, but I think if we can get this right, it's like it's fascinating to me that even like now a customer can pull up and they can order in Spanish or they can order in English and it's completely tailored to them. Looking into the future, it's like, man, the sky's the limit of how we can actually help people. And maybe that's optimistic, but I think there's a lot of potential here to do good.
I agree. And I think on that note too, I love the idea and the way that you articulated this notion of really enabling us to focus more so on the human led innovation and creativity, the things that are the human connection, because we're going to
Hmm.
have a lot more opportunity to focus on that in conjunction with, of course, our AI agent friends and otherwise. So, well, as always, I appreciate you coming back for another one, and I'll make sure that I add in the links, links to your stuff because folks are going to benefit for sure. So, thanks again.
Thanks, Alex. It's been fun.
Take care.